It was a regular afternoon, and I was sitting in the living room enjoying some quiet time after a busy day at work. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the door, breaking the silence of the house. I stood up and opened the door, only to find a man in a formal suit standing there, holding some documents and looking very serious. "Good afternoon," he said in a formal tone. "We're from the HOA, and we need to speak with an adult in the household." Before I could respond, I heard heavy footsteps approaching from behind me. I turned around, surprised to see my 12-year-old son, who had recently shot up in height, standing in the doorway at a towering 6 feet 6 inches. He had gone through an insane growth spurt and now looked far older than his age. "Good afternoon," my son said in a deep voice, greeting the man. "I'm the adult here. How can I help you?" The man stood frozen for a moment, clearly confused. I could see the mix of bewilderment and uncertainty on his face. My son, who had just entered his teenage years, was now taller than me and appeared more mature than most adults. "Uh, I guess we need to speak with someone a bit older about the community matters," the man stammered. With a wide grin on his face, my son responded, "Don't worry, sir. I'm old enough to handle this. What do you need to talk about?" The man hesitated for a moment before handing over some documents, nodding as if he had come to terms with the reality that my son was, in fact, the adult in this situation. I couldn't help but chuckle inside, knowing that this would be one of those funny family stories we'd tell for years to come. As the man handed over the papers, he gave one last hesitant glance at my son, who was still standing with an air of authority. I could tell he was trying to figure out how to handle this bizarre situation. "So," my son began, looking over the documents, "it looks like you're here about the community rules, huh?" His voice was calm, almost too calm for a kid his age, and his posture made him look like he was already in charge. The man nodded. "Yes, that's correct. We've had a few complaints from neighbors about noise and property violations. We need someone to sign off on these documents to confirm the situation is being addressed." My son glanced at me briefly, raising an eyebrow. "Dad, do you know anything about this?" he asked, as if I were the one who needed to give approval. I gave a small shrug. "Not much, buddy. I haven't had time to go through the HOA stuff, but it looks like you've got it covered." My son turned back to the man with a smile. "All right, we'll take care of it. You can trust me. Just leave everything with me." He signed the forms with exaggerated care, his large signature barely fitting on the lines, before handing the papers back. The man, clearly still unsure of how to handle this, took the papers from my son's hands. "Uh, thank you," he said, looking at my son once more, as if he were still trying to decide whether to question his age or not. "I'll be going now then." With a final glance at the towering young adult, the man turned and walked off toward the street. My son closed the door behind him with a soft chuckle. "Well, that was fun," my son said, leaning against the door. I can't believe he thought I was the adult in the house. I couldn't help but laugh. "You definitely fooled him. Maybe we should start sending you to handle all the adult stuff from now on." "Deal," my son replied, his grin growing even wider. "Next time someone from the HOA comes by, I'll handle it myself." And just like that, my 12-year-old son had become the official adult in the house, at least in the eyes of the HOA. I had a feeling that wasn't the last time I'd see him in charge. The next day, the doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't a typical knock, but a louder, more persistent ring. I groaned, hoping it wasn't more HOA business. But when I reached the door and peeked through the peephole, I saw a familiar figure, the same man from the HOA who had visited yesterday. I opened the door, but before I could say anything, he held up a hand, almost like he was defending himself. I know, you probably weren't expecting me again so soon," he said. "But there's a small issue with the forms your son signed yesterday." Oh," I said, instantly feeling a bit nervous. "What's the issue?" The man shifted awkwardly on his feet. "Well, it turns out that the form he signed was the wrong one. We need the one that authorizes a small fee to repair some community facilities, and," he paused, glancing around, "he didn't exactly fill it out properly." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "It looked fine to me." "Let me show you." He handed over the form, and I took a look. Sure enough, there was a section for a small payment that hadn't been filled out. In big, bold letters, it read, "Fee authorization." I looked up at the man, who seemed a little embarrassed. "Okay, I get it. I'll make sure my son fixes it. Thanks for letting me know." Actually, he cleared his throat and looked a bit uncomfortable. "There's a bit of an odd request I need to make. Could you, send him down to the office? It's just, well, I'm not entirely sure how to handle it. Maybe he can correct the forms in person." I stood there stunned for a moment. "Wait, you want him to come to the office and fix this? Alone?" The man nodded, now looking even more flustered. "I mean, he handled everything perfectly yesterday. We've never had a kid handle it like that before, but he seemed very capable." I shook my head, a mix of disbelief and pride swirling inside. "All right, I'll tell him to go down there. But I'm coming with him. I'm not letting a 12-year-old run around the office by himself, no matter how tall he is." A few hours later, my son and I were heading to the HOA office. I could tell he was excited, the kind of excitement you get when you're given the chance to handle something that seems way more adult than your age suggests. As we walked into the office, the receptionist, a middle-aged woman with glasses, looked up from her desk. Her eyes widened when she saw my son, towering over her, and then flickered to me for confirmation. "Hi there," my son said cheerfully, his deep voice carrying through the room. "I'm here to fix the HOA form. I think I signed the wrong one yesterday." He handed her the form with a grin, completely at ease. The receptionist blinked and glanced at me, her eyebrows raising in disbelief. "Oh, um, well, of course I can help with that." She looked at the form, visibly unsure how to process the situation, then turned to the back office. "Let me get Mr. Anderson. He'll know what to do." My son stood confidently at the counter, arms crossed, while I lingered in the background, still feeling slightly awkward. After a few moments, Mr. Anderson, the HOA manager, stepped out of the back office. When he saw my son, his face lit up, and he offered a hand, shaking my son's hand firmly. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Mr. Anderson said with a grin. "You're the young man who took care of things yesterday, right? The adult in the house?" My son nodded, unbothered by the title. "That's right. I'm here to fix the form." Mr. Anderson chuckled. "I have to admit, it's not every day we get someone your age handling HOA business. Most kids your age are still trying to avoid chores." "I'm a little different," my son replied with a shrug, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "So what do we need to do to get this sorted?" Mr. Anderson gestured to his office. "Why don't we head in there and get everything squared away? You're taking charge of this, so I'll leave it to you." I followed them into the office, still a bit incredulous at how smoothly my son was handling the situation. It was like he was born to deal with paperwork and grown-up problems. Inside, my son sat at Mr. Anderson's desk and started filling out the corrected form with ease, his long fingers moving quickly across the page. He didn't seem nervous at all, even when Mr. Anderson handed him a pen to sign the final authorization. I could barely believe what I was witnessing. My son, the same 12-year-old who still asked for help with his school homework, was taking control of a situation that most adults would find intimidating. After a few minutes, my son finished the form and stood up, handing it back to Mr. Anderson with a flourish. "All done. Thanks for your help." Mr. Anderson shook his head in amazement. "Incredible. I've been doing this for years, and I've never had a kid your age handle things with such confidence. I might need to start calling you for advice." My son just grinned. "Maybe I can run for office one day. Who knows?" As we left the office, I couldn't stop shaking my head in amazement. My son had walked out of there like he'd just negotiated a peace treaty between countries, not corrected a simple HOA form. "Well, that was something," I said, trying to process everything that had just happened. My son shrugged, a proud smile on his face. "Told you I could do it." I couldn't help but laugh. "You definitely proved me wrong, kiddo. You handled that better than most adults I know." We walked back to the car, and as I started the engine, I glanced over at him. "You really think you might run for office one day?" He thought for a moment, clearly considering the idea. "Maybe. I mean, if I can handle HOA paperwork at 12, I'm sure I could handle a few bigger problems later on." I couldn't tell if he was joking or being serious, but the confidence in his voice made me believe he might just be onto something. Who knew? With his height, charm, and that adult energy he was radiating, he might actually stand a chance in the future. When we got home, the moment we walked through the door, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the same HOA manager, Mr. Anderson. Message: just wanted to say again how impressed I am with your son. We could use more people like him in the community. Might even offer him a volunteer position here if he's interested. I read the message aloud and my son's eyes widened. Wait, what? A volunteer position? They want me to work there? I nodded, chuckling. It seems like it. Looks like you've made quite the impression on Mr. Anderson. Well, my son said thoughtfully, I guess I'll have to think about it. It could be fun. I stared at him, trying to hold back my laughter. You've gone from signing HOA forms to potentially running a community organization. You're growing up fast. He smiled and shrugged again. Just doing what needs to be done, Dad. That night over dinner, I couldn't help but bring it up again. You know, buddy, I'm proud of you. But next time the HOA comes knocking, I think I'll be the one handling things. Not a chance, he replied with a grin. I've got this down now. And with that, I knew one thing for sure. My son wasn't just growing up. He was already ahead of the game, and I couldn't be prouder of the young man he was becoming. The days went by, and the excitement of the HOA incident slowly faded into the background. However, my son seemed to carry an air of quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. He'd take charge during family discussions, make decisions about his own schedule, and even helped me out with some of the things around the house that I hadn't expected him to be interested in, like fixing a broken faucet or sorting through the garage. One morning, I woke up to the sound of him on the phone in the kitchen, speaking in a tone that was unmistakably authoritative. I walked in, trying to be as quiet as possible, but it was hard not to hear his side of the conversation. Yes, of course, I understand, he was saying. I'll get the document you need, and it will be in your inbox by tomorrow afternoon. Don't worry, we'll take care of it. I paused in the doorway, wondering who he was talking to. When he saw me, he flashed a quick grin before holding up his hand. It's the HOA. They need a few more things from me. Apparently, they want to set up a meeting with me to discuss some upcoming projects. My jaw nearly hit the floor. A meeting? You're meeting with the HOA? Yep, he replied casually, hanging up the phone and turning back to me. They want to go over some new community rules, and since I've been helping them out a lot, they think I can bring in some fresh ideas. I stared at him, completely stunned. You've got to be kidding me. They really want you to help with community projects? He nodded. Why not? I already gave them my suggestions about improving the playground last time I was there. They liked it. My son, the same 12-year-old kid who used to need help tying his shoes, was now consulting with the HOA on playground design. All right, I said, a mix of disbelief and admiration in my voice. You've officially surpassed me in adulting. What's next? Running for mayor? He laughed. Not yet, Dad. One step at a time. Later that day, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was Mr. Anderson, the HOA manager, holding a folder in his hands. Hey there, Mr. Anderson said with a wide smile, stepping inside. I just wanted to bring these over to your son. The meeting is scheduled for next week, and we're really looking forward to hearing more of his ideas. My son eagerly took the folder and flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning each document with purpose. Got it, he said, sounding like a seasoned professional. I'll be ready for the meeting. Mr. Anderson raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. I'm telling you, we need more young people like you involved. You've got the right mindset for this. As Mr. Anderson left, I turned to my son. You realize this is getting serious, right? You're practically becoming an official member of the HOA at this rate. He smiled. Hey, if I can make the community better, why not? Besides, I'm learning a lot. The following week arrived, and the day of the HOA meeting finally came. I couldn't help but feel a mix of curiosity and disbelief as we drove to the community center. My son, looking like a grown man in a young body, had been preparing for this moment for days. He'd spent hours going over the documents Mr. Anderson had dropped off, making notes in his notebook, and even Googling terms like community development and urban planning to ensure he was fully prepared. As we walked into the community center, the usual crowd of neighbors was already seated around a large table. The mood was a bit formal, with adults in business attire and others dressed casually, but still looking serious. But the moment they saw my son, who was easily the tallest person in the room, a few of them raised their eyebrows, clearly surprised to see a 12-year-old in the mix. Mr. Anderson stood up and smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet the newest member of our community planning team. Please welcome Jacob. The room went silent for a moment. I could feel the tension in the air, as if everyone was waiting for my son to say something profound, or perhaps fumble his words. But my son, ever the professional, stood tall and addressed the group with ease. "Good afternoon, everyone," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I've been going over the ideas and suggestions we've received, and I've come up with a few proposals of my own. I think we can make some improvements that will benefit the whole community, starting with the park renovations." A few of the neighbors exchanged surprised glances, clearly impressed that a kid, was speaking with such confidence and authority. He continued, laying out his ideas about creating more green spaces for families, adding shaded seating areas, and even introducing a small outdoor library where people could swap books. The room was completely captivated. No one interrupted him, and they hung on every word he said. As he finished his presentation, a few neighbors clapped, while others nodded in approval. "Jacob," Mr. Anderson said, "those are some fantastic ideas. We'll definitely need to discuss the logistics, but your input is invaluable." My son nodded. "I'm glad you think so. I believe that if we listen to everyone in the community and take their needs into account, we can make this a place people are proud to call home." It felt surreal. There was my 12-year-old son leading a meeting of adults, earning their respect, and contributing valuable ideas to shape the community. I had never imagined anything like this happening, but there he was, growing into someone I never expected. On the way home, I couldn't help but ask, "Jacob, where did all of that confidence come from? You just took charge in there like it was nothing." He shrugged, a grin on his face. "I don't know, Dad. I guess I've learned a lot already. I've been paying attention to what the adults around me are doing, and I figured I could help out too." "You've definitely got a gift, kid," I said, still in awe. "I never thought I'd be watching my son run a meeting like that." He smiled, looking a little embarrassed but proud all the same. "Maybe one day I'll run a meeting for something bigger, you know? Like a whole city." I chuckled. "At this rate, you'll probably end up running for president before I do." "Maybe," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Who knows? The future's wide open." As we pulled into the driveway, I realized something. I might have been underestimating my son this whole time. He wasn't just growing up. He was already beginning to shape the world around him in ways I could have never imagined. A few months passed, and things only escalated from there. My son Jacob continued his involvement with the HOA, attending meetings, offering suggestions, and even organizing a community cleanup event that was met with rave reviews. It was hard to believe how much he had changed, how much he had grown into his role as an influential voice in our neighborhood. His confidence was unmatched, and his ability to navigate adult situations with ease was beyond impressive. One evening, as we were having dinner, Jacob put down his fork and looked up at me with a serious expression. "Dad," he said, "I think it's time I take on something bigger. I've been thinking about running for a position on the HOA board." I almost choked on my drink. "Wait, what? You want to run for the board?" "Yeah," he replied, a determined look in his eyes. "I feel like I can do more. I've got ideas that could really make this place better, and I think the neighbors are starting to see me as someone they can trust." I sat there for a moment, processing the idea. The kid who was barely in middle school was now considering running for a position that most adults only dreamed of. And he wasn't just saying it. He had already built a reputation for being reliable, level-headed, and someone who actually listened to what the community needed. "Jacob," I said finally with a smile, "you've earned it. If you really want to do this, I'll support you. But remember, this is just the beginning. There's a lot of work ahead, and not everyone will be on board with your ideas." "I know," he said with a grin, "but I'm ready." A week later, Jacob announced his candidacy at the next HOA meeting. The room went quiet when he stood up and confidently introduced himself, outlining his vision for the community and the changes he hoped to see. His speech was thoughtful, his points well organized, and his passion for the neighborhood was undeniable. He had everyone's attention, and by the end of the meeting, several members had already voiced their support. In the following months, Jacob ran his campaign, meeting with neighbors, listening to their concerns, and showing them how committed he was to making a positive impact. His platform was clear: better public spaces, more community engagement, and a stronger voice for the younger generation. When election day finally came, I stood beside him as the results were announced. To no one's surprise, Jacob had won the position by a landslide. The people trusted him, not just because of his age or his height, but because of the heart and dedication he showed. He had proven time and again that age was just a number, and that maturity and responsibility weren't reserved for adults alone. As we celebrated his victory that evening, Jacob turned to me and said, "I told you I could do it." I couldn't help but laugh and pull him into a hug. "I couldn't be prouder, son. You've really done it. I think you're going to do amazing things." With his eyes sparkling with ambition, he said, "This is just the start, Dad. We're going to make this place great." And with that, I realized the future was in good hands. Hands that might be small in size, but were already capable of shaping the world in ways I never could have imagined.